The statistics of Massachusetts showed that not one rich man's son out of 17 ever dies rich. I pity the rich man's sons unless they have the good sense of the elder Vanderbilt, which sometimes happens. He went to his father and said, "Did you earn all your money?" "I did, my son. I began to work on a ferry boat for 25 cents a day." "Then," said his son, "I will have none of your money." And he too tried to get employment on a ferry boat that Saturday night. He could not get one there, but he did get a place for $3 a week. Of course, if a rich man's son will do that, he will get the discipline of a poor boy that is worth more than a university education to any man. He would then be able to take care of the millions of his father. But as a rule, the rich men will not let their sons do the very thing that made them great. As a rule, the rich man will not allow his son to work. And his mother, why, she would think it was a social disgrace if her poor, weak, little, lily-fingered, sissy sort of a boy had to earn his living with honest toil. I have no pity for such rich men's sons. I remember one at Niagara Falls. I think I remember one a great deal nearer. I think there are gentlemen present who were at a great banquet, and I beg pardon of his friends. At a banquet here in Philadelphia there sat beside me a kind-hearted young man, and he said, "Mr. Conwell, you have been sick for 2 or 3 years. When you go out, take my limousine, and it will take you up to your house on Broad Street." I thanked him very much, and perhaps I ought not to mention the incident in this way, but I follow the facts. I got on the seat with the driver of that limousine outside, and when we were going up, I asked the driver, "How much did this limousine cost?" $6,800, and he had to pay the duty on it. "Well," I said, "does the owner of this machine ever drive it himself?" At that, the chauffeur laughed so heartily that he lost control of his machine. He was so surprised at the question that he ran up on the sidewalk and around a corner lamppost out into the street again. And when he got out into the street, he laughed till the whole machine trembled. He said, "He drive this machine? Oh, he would be lucky if he knew enough to get out when we get there." I must tell you about a rich man's son at Niagara Falls. I came in from the lecture to the hotel, and as I approached the desk of the clerk, there stood a millionaire's son from New York. He was an indescribable specimen of anthropologic potency. He had a skull cap on one side of his head, with a gold tassel in the top of it, and a gold-headed cane under his arm with more in it than in his head. It is a very difficult thing to describe that young man. He wore an eyeglass that he could not see through, patent leather boots that he could not walk in, and pants that he could not sit down in, dressed like a grasshopper. This human cricket came up to the clerk's desk just as I entered, adjusted his unseeing eyeglass, and spake in this wise to the clerk. You see, he thought it was English, you know, the lisp. "Sir, will you have the kindness to supply me with some paper and envelopes?" The hotel clerk measured that man quick, and he pulled the envelopes and paper out of a drawer and threw them across the counter toward the young man, and then turned away to his books. You should have seen that young man when those envelopes came across that counter. He swelled up like a gobbler turkey, adjusted his unseeing eyeglass, and yelled, "Come right back here. Now, sir, will you order a servant to take that paper and envelopes to yonder desk?" Oh, the poor, miserable, contemptible American monkey. He could not carry paper and envelopes 20 feet. I suppose he could not get his arms down to do it. I have no pity for such travesties upon human nature. If you have not capital, young man, I am glad of it. What you need is common sense, not copper cents. The best thing I can do is to illustrate by actual facts well known to you all. A.T. Stewart, a poor boy in New York, had $1.50 to begin life on. He lost 87.5 cents of that on the very first venture. How fortunate that young man who loses the first time he gambles. That boy said, "I will never gamble again in business." And he never did. How did he come to lose 87.5 cents? You probably all know the story how he lost it, because he bought some needles, threads, and buttons to sell which people did not want, and had them left on his hands a dead loss. Said the boy, "I will not lose any more money in that way." Then he went around first to the doors and asked the people what did they want. Then, when he had found out what they wanted, he invested his 62.5 cents to supply a known demand. Study it wherever you choose, in business, in your profession, in your housekeeping, whatever your life, that one thing is the secret of success. You must first know the demand. You must first know what people need, and then invest yourself where you are most needed. A.T. Stewart went on that principle until he was worth what amounted afterward to $40 million, owning the very store in which Mr. Wanamaker carries on his great work in New York. His fortune was made by losing something, which taught him the great lesson that he must only invest himself or his money in something that people need. When will you salesmen learn it? When will you manufacturers learn that you must know the changing needs of humanity if you would succeed in life? Apply yourselves, all you Christian people, as manufacturers or merchants or workmen, to supply that human need. It is a great principle as broad as humanity and as deep as the Scripture itself. The time never came in the history of the world when you could get rich so quickly manufacturing without capital as you can now. But you will say, you cannot do anything of the kind. You cannot start without capital. Young man, let me illustrate for a moment. I must do it. It is my duty to every young man and woman, because we are all going into business very soon on the same plan. Young man, remember, if you know what people need, you have gotten more knowledge of a fortune than any amount of capital can give you. There was a poor man out of work living in Hingham, Massachusetts. He lounged around the house until one day his wife told him to get out and work, and as he lived in Massachusetts, he obeyed his wife. He went out and sat down on the shore of the bay and whittled a soaked shingle into a wooden chain. His children that evening quarreled over it, and he whittled a second one to keep peace. While he was whittling the second one, a neighbor came in and said, "Why don't you whittle toys and sell them? You could make money at that." "Oh," he said, "I would not know what to make." "Why don't you ask your own children right here in your own house what to make?" "What is the use of trying that?" said the carpenter. "My children are different from other people's children." I used to see people like that when I taught school. But he acted upon the hint, and the next morning when Mary came down the stairway, he asked, "What do you want for a toy?" She began to tell him she would like a doll's bed, a doll's washstand, a doll's carriage, a little doll's umbrella, and went on with a list of things that would take him a lifetime to supply. So, consulting his own children in his own house, he took the firewood, for he had no money to buy lumber, and whittled those strong, unpainted Hingham toys that were for so many years known all over the world. That man began to make those toys for his own children, and then made copies and sold them through the boot and shoe store next door. He began to make a little money, and then a little more. And Mr. Lawson, in his Frenzied Finance, says that man is the richest man in old Massachusetts, and I think it is the truth. And that man is worth $100 million today, and has only been 34 years making it on that one principle, that one must judge that what his own children like at home, other people's children would like in their homes too. To judge the human heart by oneself, by one's wife, by one's children. It is the royal road to success in manufacturing. Oh, but you say, didn't he have any capital? Yes, a penknife, but I don't know that he had paid for that. I spoke thus to an audience in New Britain, Connecticut, and a lady 4 seats back went home and tried to take off her collar, and the collar button stuck in the buttonhole. She threw it out and said, I am going to get up something better than that to put on collars. Her husband said, after what Conwell said tonight, you see there is a need for an improved collar fastener that is easier to handle. There is a human need. There is a great fortune. Now then, get up a collar button and get rich. He made fun of her, and consequently made fun of me. And that is one of the saddest things which comes over me like a deep cloud of midnight sometimes. Although I have worked so hard for more than half a century, yet how little I have ever really done. Notwithstanding the greatness and the handsomeness of your compliment tonight, I do not believe there is 1 in 10 of you that is going to make $1 million because you are here tonight. But it is not my fault. It is yours. I say sincerely, what is the use of my talking if people never do what I advise them to do? When her husband ridiculed her, she made up her mind she would make a better collar button, and when a woman makes up her mind she will, and does not say anything about it, she does it. It was that New England woman who invented the snap button, which you can find anywhere now. It was first a collar button with a spring cap attached to the outer side. Any of you who wear modern waterproofs know the button that simply pushes together, and when you unbutton it, you simply pull it apart. That is the button to which I refer and which she invented. She afterward invented several other buttons, then invested in more, and then was taken into partnership with great factories. Now that woman goes over the seas every summer in her private steamship, yes, and takes her husband with her. If her husband were to die, she would have money enough left now to buy a foreign duke or count or some such title as that at the latest quotations. Now what is my lesson in that incident? It is this. I told her then, though I did not know her, what I now say to you. Your wealth is near to you. You are looking right over it. And she had to look over it because it was right under her chin. Great inventors of the world. Again, this lesson comes before us. The great inventor sits next to you, or you are the person yourself. Oh, but you say, I have never invented anything in my life. Neither did the great inventors until they discovered one great secret. Do you think it is a man with a head like a bushel measure, or a man like a stroke of lightning? It is neither. The really great man is a plain, straightforward, everyday, common-sense man. You would not dream that he was a great inventor if you did not see something he had actually done. His neighbors do not regard him so great. You never see anything great over your back fence. You say there is no greatness among your neighbors. It is all away off somewhere else. Their greatness is ever so simple, so plain, so earnest, so practical, that the neighbors and friends never recognize it. True greatness is often unrecognized. That is sure. You do not know anything about the greatest men and women. I went out to write the life of General Garfield, and a neighbor, knowing I was in a hurry, and as there was a great crowd around the front door, took me around to General Garfield's back door and shouted, "Jim, Jim!" And very soon Jim came to the door and let me in, and I wrote the biography of one of the grandest men of the nation, and yet he was just the same old Jim to his neighbor. If you know a great man in Philadelphia and you should meet him tomorrow, you would say, "How are you, Sam?" or "Good morning, Jim." Of course you would. That is just what you would do. Inventors of the world. Again, this lesson comes before us. The great inventor sits next to you, or you are the person yourself. Oh, but you say, "I have never invented anything in my life." Neither did the great inventors until they discovered one great secret. Do you think it is a man with a head like a bushel measure, or a man like a stroke of lightning? It is neither. The really great man is a plain, straightforward, everyday, common-sense man. You would not dream that he was a great inventor if you did not see something he had actually done. His neighbors do not regard him so great. You never see anything great over your back fence. You say there is no greatness among your neighbors. It is all away off somewhere else. Their greatness is ever so simple, so plain, so earnest, so practical, that the neighbors and friends never recognize it. True greatness is often unrecognized. That is sure. You do not know anything about the greatest men and women. I went out to write the life of General Garfield, and a neighbor, knowing I was in a hurry, and as there was a great crowd around the front door, took me around to General Garfield's back door and shouted, "Jim, Jim!" And very soon, Jim came to the door and let me in, and I wrote the biography of one of the grandest men of the nation, and yet he was just the same old Jim to his neighbor. If you know a great man in Philadelphia and you should meet him tomorrow, you would say, "How are you, Sam?" or "Good morning, Jim." Of course you would. That is just what you would do. Abraham Lincoln's principle for greatness can be adopted by nearly all. This was his rule. Whatsoever he had to do at all, he put his whole mind into it and held it all there until that was all done. That makes men great almost anywhere. He stuck to those papers at that table and did not look up at me, and I sat there trembling. Finally, when he had put the string around his papers, he pushed them over to one side and looked at me, and a smile came over his worn face. He said, "I am a very busy man and have only a few minutes to spare. Now, tell me in the fewest words what it is you want." I began to tell him and mentioned the case, and he said, "I have heard all about it, and you do not need to say any more. Mr. Stanton was talking to me only a few days ago about that. You can go to the hotel and rest assured that the President never did sign an order to shoot a boy under 20 years of age, and never will. You can say that to his mother anyhow." Then he said to me, "How is it going in the field?" I said, "We sometimes get discouraged." And he said, "It is all right. We are going to win out now. We are getting very near the light. No man ought to wish to be President of the United States, and I will be glad when I get through. Then Tad and I are going out to Springfield, Illinois. I have bought a farm out there, and I don't care if I again earn only 25 cents a day. Tad has a mule team, and we are going to plant onions." Then he asked me, "Were you brought up on a farm?" I said, "Yes, in the Berkshire Hills of Massachusetts." He then threw his leg over the corner of the big chair and said, "I have heard many a time, ever since I was young, that up there in those hills you have to sharpen the noses of the sheep in order to get down to the grass between the rocks." He was so familiar, so everyday, so farmer-like, that I felt right at home with him at once. He then took hold of another roll of paper and looked up at me and said, "Good morning." I took the hint then and got up and went out. After I had gotten out, I could not realize I had seen the President of the United States at all. But a few days later, when still in the city, I saw the crowd pass through the East Room by the coffin of Abraham Lincoln, and when I looked at the upturned face of the murdered president, I felt then that the man I had seen such a short time before, who, so simple a man, so plain a man, was one of the greatest men that God ever raised up to lead a nation on to ultimate liberty. Yet he was only Old Abe to his neighbors. When they had the second funeral, I was invited among others and went out to see that same coffin put back in the tomb at Springfield. Around the tomb stood Lincoln's old neighbors, to whom he was just Old Abe. Of course, that is all they would say. Mechanic, do you think he is great? He is nothing but a puffed-up balloon, held down by his big feet. There is no greatness there. Who are the great men and women? My attention was called the other day to the history of a very little thing that made the fortune of a very poor man. It was an awful thing, and yet, because of that experience, he, not the great inventor or a genius, invented the pen that is now called the safety pin, and out of that safety pin made the fortune of one of the great aristocratic families of this nation. A poor man in Massachusetts who had worked in the nail works was injured at 38, and he could earn but little money. He was employed in the office to rub out the marks on the bills made by pencil memorandums, and he used a rubber until his hand grew tired. He then tied a piece of rubber on the end of a stick and worked it like a plane. His little girl came and said, "Why, you have a patent, haven't you?" The father said afterward, "My daughter told me when I took that stick and put the rubber on the end that there was a patent, and that was the first thought of that." He went to Boston and applied for his patent, and every one of you that has a rubber-tipped pencil in your pocket is now paying tribute to the millionaire. No capital, not a penny did he invest in it. All was income, all the way up into the millions. This country is not run by votes. Do you think it is? It is governed by influence. It is governed by the ambitions and the enterprises which control votes. The young woman that thinks she is going to vote for the sake of holding an office is making an awful blunder. That other young man gets up and says, "There are going to be great men in this country and in Philadelphia." Is that so? When? When there comes a great war, when we get into difficulty through watchful waiting in Mexico, when we get into war with England over some frivolous deed, or with Japan or China or New Jersey or some distant country. Then I will march up to the cannon's mouth. I will sweep up among the glistening bayonets. I will leap into the arena and tear down the flag and bear it away in triumph. I will come home with stars on my shoulder and hold every office in the gift of the nation, and I will be great. No, you won't. You think you are going to be made great by an office. But remember that if you are not great before you get the office, you won't be great when you secure it. Greatness consists not in the holding of some future office, but really consists in doing great deeds with little means and the accomplishment of vast purposes from the private ranks of life. To be great at all, one must be great here, now, in Philadelphia. He who can give to this city better streets and better sidewalks, better schools and more colleges, more happiness and more civilization, more of God, he will be great anywhere. Let every man or woman here, if you never hear me again, remember this, that if you wish to be great at all, you must begin where you are and what you are in Philadelphia now. He that can give to this city any blessing, he who can be a good citizen where he lives here, he that can make better homes, he that can be a blessing, whether he works in the shop or sits behind the counter or keeps house, whatever be his life, he who would be great anywhere must first be great in his own Philadelphia. End of Acres of Diamonds by Richard Conwell. This book recorded by Phil Chenevert.